May 8th, 1945 was the day that the Allied powers accepted Germany's unconditional surrender. Today, we are going to celebrate Victory in Europe Day and some key events that led up to it. Hello, friends, and welcome to this episode of the History Revolution podcast. Before you start this podcast, go to thehistoryrevolution.com/VE for your free podcast companion. Now, let's get started. Adolf Hitler and the Nazis took control of Germany in 1933. Hitler had worked for years to rise to power in Germany. He was arrested in 1925 for a failed coup. While in prison, he wrote Mein Kampf, which laid out his political beliefs and ideology, blaming Jewish people for all of Germany's problems. The German people were suffering financially as a result of losing World War I in combination with the Great Depression. Hitler was a powerful and skilled orator. He gave many fiery, impassioned speeches to gain support for the Nazi Party. The Jews were his scapegoat. Once Hitler took control, he began rebuilding the German military. This was against the Treaty of Versailles signed after World War I. This was the first step in Hitler's dream of world domination. The world was weary of another war, and the effects of the Great Depression were crushing the morale of people worldwide. Other world leaders sought appeasement with Hitler. Hitler used this to his advantage. One of his most loyal followers was Joseph Goebbels, a master at propaganda. Goebbels made films, posters, and articles supporting the Nazi cause, building German Aryan pride as well as vilifying Jewish people. This propaganda only strengthened Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. World War II began in earnest on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, and after that, countries began to fall like dominoes. By June of 1940, France had fallen. The Nazis controlled Europe. At this point, only Great Britain remained. The United States had not entered the war, and the Soviet Union had signed a treaty of non-aggression with Germany. However, that would all change in 1941. On June 22, 1941, Germany launched a full-scale attack on the Soviet Union. At first, the Soviets were unable to stop the Germans, but they were able to slow the Germans down enough that they were never able to reach the capital of Moscow, and winter was coming. The Germans were unprepared for fighting the Soviets through the brutal Russian winter. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The United States officially entered the war on December 8, 1941, declaring war on Japan. Japan and Germany were allies, and Germany declared war on the United States on December 11, 1941, which the United States reciprocated. Since Germany controlled most of Europe, it was hard for the Allies to find the right place and time to launch an attack on the European mainland. The Nazis had fortified defenses along the coastline. These defenses, along with natural geographical features like the Alps, protected Germany from attack. The Allies were able to successfully attack and drive the Nazis out of Africa throughout 1942 and 1943, but they still couldn't crack the European mainland. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched Operation Overlord, more commonly known as D-Day. Years of planning along with some deception made the operation a success. It took a coordinated effort between forces at sea, on land, and in the air. Precise weather forecasts and tide conditions were all crucial to the attack. Hitler believed that General George Patton would be leading any attempted invasion. The Allies used this to their advantage and stationed Patton in southern England with a literal fake army made of inflatable and cardboard tanks, jeeps, and trucks. The deception worked, and the Germans prepared for his impending invasion from that location. The Allies instead landed 156,000 Allied troops on the beaches of Normandy in France. D-Day was pivotal in loosening Hitler's grip on France and Europe. The Allies finally had a significant land force on mainland Europe to challenge the Nazis. After D-Day, the Allies fought across France and drove the Nazis back toward Germany. In December, Hitler launched a last gasp offensive attack to try and break the Allies. On December 16, 1944, the Battle of the Bulge began. By December 18th, the important crossroads at the town of Bastogne was surrounded by the Germans. The Germans demanded the surrounded Americans to surrender, to which American Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe responded, "Nuts." By December 26th, General Patton and his army had fought their way from northeastern France. Their arrival ended the siege of Bastogne, and the Allies were then able to go back on the offensive. By January 1945, the writing was on the wall. Germany would not win this war, but Hitler refused to admit defeat. On January 31st, 1945, the Soviets entered into Germany from the east, while Patton and his army crossed the Rhine River into Germany from the west on March 22nd. Coincidentally, this was just before Patton's rival, British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. By April 27th, Berlin was surrounded by the Soviets. Adolf Hitler and his longtime companion Eva Braun got married on April 29th in Hitler's underground bunker. Both would commit suicide on April 30th, leaving Joseph Goebbels as Reich Chancellor. Goebbels would then commit suicide himself on May 1st. On May 7th, 1945, the Germans offered unconditional surrender to the Allies, although several attempts had been made to surrender over the previous weeks. Unfortunately, the previous offers could not be accepted because Hitler was still alive and the offers were not approved by the High Command. On May 8, 1945, it was announced to the world that the war in Europe was over. This date just so happened to coincide with President Truman's 61st birthday. However, the war against Japan still remained unfinished. In his radio broadcast announcing the victory in Europe, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill told the British people, "We may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing, as Japan remains unsubdued." United States President Harry Truman echoed the same sentiment, saying it was a victory only half won. Defeating the Germans and the Axis powers in Europe gave the Allied countries the ability to focus on Asia to defeat Japan. World War II would continue for several more months until the Allies accepted the Japanese surrender on September 2nd, 1945. All told, the number of worldwide deaths, including military and civilian, is estimated above 50 million. That includes almost 420,000 Americans. The loss of life during World War II had never been seen, even during World War I. So today we humbly celebrate Victory in Europe Day and offer our sincere gratitude to all of the brave men and women who contributed to the Allied victory in World War II. Thank you again, friends, for watching and listening to the History Revolution podcast. Remember, go to thehistoryrevolution.com/VE to download your free podcast companion. God bless you, and see you again next week.